Hey Bible lovers, I'm Tim Nichols, and I'm here to bring you your Nichols Worth, and today I'm going to give you my top 5 wide margin Bibles, plus a few honorable mentions. We're going to go ahead and start with the New King James and King James together because Thomas Nelson often produces both of them in editions with the same title that have the same layout. But the NKJV Sovereign Wide Margin. One thing about wide margins I think that is very important is if you're going to have 2 columns, you need to have 2 margins, because when you have 2 columns and only 1 margin, if you want to take your notes on the verses on the inside, then it's very difficult. But one thing about this one is it has margins all the way around. That's very important when it comes to a 2-column layout. I absolutely love the fact they went with gold drop caps on here. I just think that's really kind of cool. Comes with a nice large font. On each of these Bibles, I'll go ahead and put the font size on the bottom of the screen so you can check that out, just so I don't have to tell you about each one. But this is really nice, and it's got your footnotes and your references on the bottom, so it gives you nice even columns and just really good layout. Also, one thing I think about a 2-column is just beautiful is when they center justify that poetry to make it look just like music. Just think that's very important. Red letter on this is, I'm going to give it a solid not bad. That's pretty good. The paper on this is excellent. You can see the opacity is not bad at all. It is bound a little loosely, but I've not noticed any constructional issues with this, like it's going to fall apart or anything. And what that does is it gives it that real ability to lay good and flat and gives you all that margin space, even toward the beginning. I mean, you get all your margin space here. It's not cheating at all. No problem laying flat. Really nice dark font. Just really beautiful Bible. Same with the King James. In the King James Version, one thing about the King James Bible is often it's in a verse-by-verse format, and you don't get to enjoy the poetry like you normally would. Now, this one is in a verse-by-verse format, but when you get to the poetry, you're going to see that it's somewhat center justified. It's not quite perfectly centered, but it definitely has that musical look with your notes and references on the bottom. Beautiful. And then when you get to the New Testament, of course, the words of Christ are going to be in a really nice red. Now, one of the reasons I think the red looks better on this edition than it does in the personal size edition without the wide margins is because of those gold drop caps. When the drop caps were red, it had a tendency to be so dark, it gave you the illusion that the words of Christ were not as dark. But this is a beautiful, beautiful wide margin. Now let's move into the CSB. I wanted to pick the 2-column verse by verse, but I couldn't because you don't have enough inner margin space. So this, because it's single column, you do have a little bit of inner margin space here for notes, but ultimately, that's all you have to use is that outside margin in the bottom, and your notes will be next to the corresponding verses. This has beautiful 36 GSM Bible paper, excellently laid out. In a single column, you are going to have that issue with the poetic settings. That's why I wish they'd go ahead and center justify, because what that would do is that would hide most of that ghosting. But it's not real significant. When you get to the New Testament, words of Christ are in black. It does have some limited footnotes, and in the New Testament, it's going to have some limited references as well. One cool thing about the CSB is there's no mistaking which verses are quoting the Old Testament because they're bold, really beautiful. All right, now let's move into the NASB. The NASB, I love this because this is basically the Thompson Chain Reference Bible with the references removed. So you've got that inner margin, that outer margin, just absolutely gorgeous. Love this dark font. Love the formatting. Love the red accents when it comes to the chapter and topic headings. I love that red accent. Then when you get to the New Testament, you're going to see the words of Christ are in red, which is not super common with an NASB, but it is well done. Really love the margin space. Really love the red accents. Just really beautifully done Bible. Of course, going to have your concordance. When it comes to the ESV, and I'm going to tell you, even though the ESV is not my favorite translation, this is my favorite wide margin. I wish that every translation would replicate this because you've got really beautiful, nice, wide margins. You've got a beautiful dark font, and then you have those dark verse numbers. The only issue is the references in the corner. If they'd move those to the bottom, then this would be absolutely perfect. But this, from a readership standpoint, it's the perfect size font. It's really just the perfect layout, but here is where this one really stands out. I think that is the best red letter that I've ever seen in any Bible. Nice and dark, just beautifully done. Love this one. So this is probably my favorite, even though this would not be the one I'd use the most because the ESV, but the ESV is definitely my number 2 translation. Now, a couple honorable mentions. These are going to be more in a non-traditional way of your wide margin, but check this out. This is from Holman in the CSB. This one has lined margins, and check out all that space. You've got your text here. You're going to sacrifice this. It's a little bit of a smaller font. And again, they got the references in the corner. I wish they moved them to the bottom. But you have all this space on the side, all this space on the top. I mean, that's at least 2 inches of space. Plus, you've got any extra space here. Just beautifully done. Beautifully done. Love the poetic settings. Love the paragraph settings. Love those big dark verses. Love the lines to where it really keeps you on task. The only disadvantage to this is you don't have any space for those inner columns. So that's why I didn't include it in my top, but it's still a really nice one. This one really technically isn't a wide margin, but this is from Smith & Jones Bible Publishers. And this one's really cool because instead of the Schofield referencing system, they just remove the references and give you those margins in the middle. That's a really cool idea. It does make it a little difficult to determine which column the notes belong to, but just for innovation alone, I thought this one deserved to be included. And then finally, the NKJV single column with the inside column references and the super nice wide margin. Because this is single column, that makes this wide margin on the outside acceptable. But I love that you get the references with this in that inside. It pulls the text out of the gutter. Single column, beautiful poetic settings. And this has got the 36 GSM paper. This is actually out of print, but it's not out of stock. So if you like this, you need to go ahead and buy it now before they run out of them. I'm really hoping Thomas Nelson decides to bring this one back. But then when you get to the New Testament, words of Christ are in red. The only disadvantage of this one is that it is not line matched. But with that big, thick Bible paper, it's really difficult to tell. This is a beautiful layout. So what are your favorite wide margins? Those are mine. Let me know yours in the comments. God bless you. Keep calm. Jesus on. This is your Nicholsworth.